Imagine this. You're walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome in 67 AD. Sunlight flickers off marble columns. Voices echo through the forum. Then you see something that chills your blood. The emperor himself, Nero, striding past the temples with what appears to be his new bride, a striking young woman, wrapped in delicate silks and glittering with jewels. But murmurs trail behind them, because the truth is known by all. That woman walking beside the most powerful man alive was once a boy named Sporus. And what Nero did to him is one of the most disturbing examples of psychological and physical cruelty in ancient history. Before we dive into this haunting tale of obsession and survival, hit the like button if you enjoy uncovering the darkest corners of history. Subscribe for more stories like this, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible that these ancient echoes still reach us today, connecting people from all over the world through a shared curiosity for what came before. Because what you about to hear isn't just another story of Roman indulgence. It is a brutal illustration of how unchecked power can warp grief into delusion and love into control. Sporus may be a name lost in most history books, but once you know his story, it will stay with you. Let's begin with the man who orchestrated it all. Nero didn't start out as a monster. In fact, the early years of his rule offered hope. At only 16, he became emperor, and many believed a new golden age was beginning. He lowered taxes, sponsored games, and even acted on stage to entertain the public. But the thing about power, true, absolute power, is that it distorts. By 65 AD, something had clearly fractured inside Nero. Maybe it was the constant anxiety of being surrounded by traitors. Maybe it was the crushing loneliness of being a god among mortals. Or maybe it all changed the day the one person he seemed to truly love was taken from him. Her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she was everything Nero thought he needed. Poppaea wasn't just beautiful. She was sharp, charismatic, and every bit as ambitious as Nero. Compared to Nero's first wife, the cold and politically arranged Octavia, Poppaea seemed like fire to Octavia's ice. Their affair, which started in scandal, quickly became an obsession. Nero was consumed by her intensely, terrifyingly. Ancient records describe his behavior as jealous to the point of madness. He guarded her like a precious object, keeping her isolated and constantly watched. Gifts poured in: Indian gems, Chinese silks, rare oils. He divorced Octavia, alienating many, and married Poppaea in a lavish imperial wedding. But none of it was enough. Nero didn't just want her, he wanted her completely. He began cutting her off from her family, surrounding her with people loyal only to him. Dozens of statues and paintings were made, many placed in his private quarters so he could gaze at her even when she wasn't around. This wasn't love. It was possession. Poppaea understood this, and she used it. She advanced her family status and built a protective circle of eyes. But she never lost her spark. Unlike others at court, she didn't tiptoe around Nero's moods. She challenged him on policy, on his artistic ego, even mocking his performances when they fell flat. That spirit made her powerful. But it also made her vulnerable. And one day, it cost her everything. The details differ depending on which ancient writer you believe. But what's agreed is that one day in 65 AD, they fought. Some say it was about Nero's late nights. Others say it was about his obsession with performance. Whatever the cause, the argument turned violent. Poppaea was pregnant, possibly with Nero's heir. She pushed back too hard, and in a moment of uncontrolled rage, Nero struck her. Some accounts say a single brutal kick to her stomach. Others describe a longer beating. Either way, the injuries were fatal. Imagine Nero realizing what he'd done. The man who ruled the world, whose word was law, had just killed the woman he couldn't live without. According to ancient witnesses, he collapsed over her body, weeping, begging her to live, screaming orders no mortal could follow. He called doctors, promised riches, threatened torture, but nothing helped. She died within hours. And with her, any remnants of Nero's sanity seemed to slip away. His grief turned into obsession. He preserved her body instead of burning it, built a tomb worthy of gods, and declared her divine. He'd speak to her corpse for hours, convinced she could still hear him. The court had to play along. People referred to her in the present tense, left her seat open at dinners, and acted as if nothing had changed. And then, into this madness, stepped Sporus, completely unaware that his life was about to become a waking nightmare. Sporus was likely in his mid-teens, raised as a slave but freed young, living within the palace walls. That gave him access to education and comfort, but it also meant total dependency on the emperor's will. What drew Nero to Sporus wasn't his intelligence, it was his face. Multiple accounts note that he looked eerily like Populae, especially around the eyes. In a society where physical likeness was seen as spiritual connection, this resemblance must have seemed almost supernatural. The first time Nero laid eyes on Sporus after Poppaea's death, something clicked. Here, Nero thought, was his second chance. His broken mind didn't see a boy. He saw a path to bring Poppaea back. The one obstacle? Sporus was male. But Nero, who fancied himself a living god, didn't see that as a problem. He could change that. What followed was one of the cruelest transformations ever recorded. Nero summoned surgeons and ordered them to alter Sporus's body permanently. This wasn't cosmetic. It was invasive, irreversible, and entirely against Sporus's will. The procedure, done with crude tools and minimal anesthesia, was brutal and often deadly. But even if Sporus survived, he would never be the same. Physically changed, socially ostracized, emotionally shattered, this was not a transformation. It was erasure. Sporus's recovery took weeks, maybe longer. When it was done, Nero made a public announcement. He was marrying Sporus. The preparations were extravagant. Sporus was renamed Sabina and outfitted in custom-made dresses tailored to fit his altered body. Jewelers repurposed Poppaea's old treasures. Servants taught Sporus how to apply makeup, style his hair, and walk, talk, and behave like an aristocratic Roman woman. It was all choreographed to transform him into a ghost, a living stand-in for someone long dead. But behind every gown, every painted face, every wig was a terrified teenager forced into a role he never asked for. The wedding was timed with a spring festival and held in Nero's grand hall, dripping in flowers and golden light. Musicians played, nobles feasted, and the entire empire watched in uneasy silence. On the surface, it looked like any royal wedding. But those who understood what was really happening saw something else entirely. The Emperor of Rome, once heralded as a bright new hope, was now marrying a boy he had forcibly altered to resemble his deceased wife. The rituals were all their vows, bread, blessings, but the air was thick with dread. No one dared speak against it. To do so was to risk being cast out. Or worse. After the wedding, Sporus lived like an empress in theory. He had a private suite, a household staff, an allowance from the treasury. But none of it could buy back his identity. Every part of his life was performance. He sat beside Nero at banquets, paraded in public, played the part of doting wife. Nero referred to him as Poppaea, recalled stories they had never shared, and expected Sporus to remember them. Incredibly, Sporus adapted. He learned to read Nero's moods, respond in character, survive by blending into the fantasy. But it took a toll. Sources say he became withdrawn, a shadow of the person he once was. And then came Greece. Nero, ever convinced of his brilliance, embarked on a cultural tour, entering music and theater contests. Of course, Sporus came too as false empress on full display. Greek officials struggled to make sense of it. The conqueror of their lands was now traveling with a teenage boy dressed in silks, using a softer voice, presented to crowds as the Empress of Rome. By 68, Nero had crossed the line. Provinces rebelled. Generals marched. The Praetorian Guard turned against him. Declared a public enemy, Nero fled Rome with a few loyal followers, Sporus among them. Even in his downfall, Nero clung to the fantasy. They hid in a villa outside Rome. Nero panicked, made wild plans, rehearsed dramatic final words. As his enemies closed in, he finally took his own life. But that left Sporus exposed. He was now a symbol of everything. Nero had become a living reminder of a fallen god, and powerful men wanted him. One by one, Rome's new leaders took him in. First Sabinus, then Otho, then Vitellius. Each treated him the same way Nero had, dressed him as a woman, called him by Poppaea's name, paraded him around like a prize. And then Vitellius planned something worse, forcing Sporus into a public spectacle in the arena, reenacting scenes of myth and violence. Faced with the final degradation, being humiliated in front of thousands, Sporus made the only decision that was truly his own. He ended his life, most likely with poison. Sometime in 69 A, he was probably no older than 20. In death, he claimed back the agency stolen from him. Historians wrote him off as a footnote, a symbol of Nero's depravity. But behind that symbol was a real person, erased before he ever had a chance to live his own life. Sporus wasn't just Nero's living doll. He was a human being stripped of identity, dignity, and choice. And yet, in choosing how to die, he made one final statement, that even a life manipulated by emperors can end on one's own terms. We'll never know who Sporus was before Nero's madness found him. What he hoped for, what he dreamed of, lost forever. But remembering his story isn't about glorifying horror. It's about seeing the people behind the power plays, the individuals caught in the machinery of history. Sporus reminds us that empires aren't just marble and gold. They're also built on lives, often broken ones. And sometimes, the quietest tragedies say the most about what it means to be human.